She switched my baby at birth for a boy, and years later, my real son found me. For years, I had no idea I was living someone else's story, raising a child who wasn't mine by blood, while my real son was out there in the world without me. I thought I knew the meaning of love, sacrifice, and family until the day the truth shattered everything I believed. What I uncovered didn't just rewrite my past, it reshaped my entire future. To understand how it all happened, I need to take you back to the moment it began the day I gave birth. I remember the day as if it's etched into my very bones. It was the day I thought my life truly began. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed in that cold, sterile hospital room, humming louder than they should have, as though they were mocking the weakness in my body. I had been in labor for hours, longer than anyone expected, and I was drained, barely holding on. My body was trembling from exhaustion, but through it all, there was only one thought burning in my mind. I want to hold my baby. The contractions had wrung me out like a rag, and when the doctors finally intervened, I was slipping in and out of consciousness. I can still remember the faint smell of antiseptic, sharp and bitter, mixing with the faint sweetness of the lotion the nurses wore. I can recall the distant voices, commands, numbers, medical jargon I couldn't understand floating around me like a fog. I wasn't in control anymore. I wasn't even sure I was awake. And then through the haze came the sound, a cry. My baby's cry, piercing, desperate, alive. That sound cut through everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the fear. My chest clenched with joy and relief. Hez here. He made it. My heart whispered, "That's my child." But what I didn't realize in that moment was that the most important moment of my life had already been tampered with. A nurse leaned over me, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped tightly in a blue blanket. To this day, I can still picture her face. She wasn't one of the warm, smiling nurses who had comforted me earlier. Her expression was sharp, focused, as if she were somewhere else in her mind. She moved with quick, almost frantic precision, and her eyes darted toward the door more than once. I was too weak to question it, too overwhelmed by the rush of love that drowned everything else. When she placed the baby in my arms, the world disappeared. My vision tunneled. There was only him, his tiny chest rising and falling, his fragile fingers twitching against my skin, his lips parting with soft whimpers that broke into cries when I shifted slightly. I wept harder than I had ever wept in my life. Tears poured down my cheeks as I whispered to him, promises that I would love him, protect him, give him everything I had. I didn't notice the flicker in the nurse's eyes. Not then. Looking back now, I know what I saw wasn't joy or pride. It wasn't the kind of tenderness I had seen in other nurses. It was something else, something darker. It was hesitation. It was fear, and it vanished as quickly as it appeared, hidden behind a tight professional mask. But I didn't question it. How could I? I was a brand new mother, overwhelmed, exhausted, drunk on the feeling of this small miracle pressed against me. All I could think was, Hez here, Hez mine. I kissed his soft forehead, inhaled the scent of new life, and let myself believe this was the happiest moment I would ever know. My body was weak, but my heart felt strong enough to hold the whole world. I believed with every fiber of my being that I was beginning a beautiful new chapter of my life. I didn't know that a silent theft had taken place, that the tiny boy in my arms wasn't the child I had carried for 9 long months. I carried him home with joy in my heart, completely unaware of the truth, completely unaware that in that hospital room something had been stolen from me, something I wouldn't even realize was missing for years. I thought I was holding my son. I thought I was beginning my life as a mother. But the truth? The truth had been twisted before I ever left that hospital. And for years I lived in the shadow of that secret. For years I raised a child who wasn't mine by blood. But love, no matter how deep, can't erase the truth forever, and soon the cracks began to show. Those first days at home with my baby felt like stepping into a dream I had been waiting for my entire life. The house seemed warmer, softer, as if every room had shifted to welcome him. I was sore, tired, and my body still carried the weight of the delivery, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the tiny boy in my arms, swaddled tight, his breath warm against my skin. I sat for hours in the old rocking chair by the window, staring at his little face, memorizing every wrinkle, every eyelash, every sigh. I whispered lullabies my mother once sang to me and imagined the years ahead, his first day of school, his first bike ride, all the milestones I would be there to see. As the weeks turned into months, my life began to revolve around him completely. Every little sound he made filled me with joy. His first giggle, unexpected and pure, sent me into tears. When he reached for me with tiny hands clutching my finger with all the strength his small body could muster, I felt an unbreakable bond tether me to him. His first steps, wobbly, unsteady but determined, had me cheering so loud I startled him. His first word, "Mama," came like a gift from heaven, and I thought my heart would burst. In every way that mattered, I was his mother, and he was my son. But as he grew, so did the small things I couldn't quite explain. At family gatherings, relatives made comments I tried not to take personally. "He doesn't really look like you, does he?" one aunt said with a chuckle. "He must take after some distant relative," another suggested. I smiled and brushed it off, but inside, each comment felt like a tiny crack forming in my heart. I told myself babies change. I told myself features shift as they grow. But as time passed, instead of seeing my eyes in his face or his father's grin on his lips, I saw something else entirely, something I couldn't place. His hair was darker than mine, his skin tone different, his expressions foreign. He didn't have the same laugh as my family, the same quirks, the little habits we passed down like heirlooms. Instead, he carried traits that seemed to come from nowhere, from someone I had never met. Still, I tried to ignore it. Love was louder than doubt. Whenever he wrapped his arms around my neck, whenever he buried his face into my shoulder, I told myself that this was all that mattered. I was his mother because I was the one who woke up with him at night, the one who rocked him to sleep, the one who kissed his bruises and calmed his fears. Love was more important than blood. Love was enough. But the whispers from others never stopped. Strangers in grocery stores tilted their heads and asked, "Where did he get those eyes?" Or "Who does he take after?" Harmless questions on the surface, but every one of them chipped at me. I laughed them off, but later, alone in my room, I would stare at him while he slept and feel a pang of unease I couldn't shake. And then there was his personality. He was gentle, thoughtful, often lost in his own little world. He didn't carry the stubborn streak my family teased me for. He didn't laugh at the same silly jokes my siblings and I always found hilarious. Even in his mannerisms, he felt different. My relatives brushed it off with kind words. "He's just unique," they said. And I clung to that explanation, repeating it to myself over and over. Every child is unique. That's all it is. Still, in the quiet moments, when the house was dark and I was the only one awake, I would look at him and feel something I couldn't put into words. An ache deep in my chest, as though a puzzle piece was missing and I didn't know where to find it. I told myself it was just the fear of being a new mother, the insecurities every parent feels. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Yet love is stubborn. Love chooses to believe. And I loved him so fiercely that I refused to let doubt win. I defended him against every offhand remark, every raised eyebrow, every whisper that hinted he didn't resemble me. When people said, "Are you sure he's yours?" I laughed through the sting and said, "Of course he is. Has my son." Because I believed it with every fiber of my being, because I needed to believe it. I told myself again and again, "He is mine. He has to be." And for years, that belief carried me through. For years, I drowned out the questions with bedtime stories, with birthday cakes, with scraped knees and bear hugs. I convinced myself that doubt was the enemy and love was the answer. I thought I could silence the truth. But love, no matter how deep, cannot erase what's real. It can only cover it for so long before the cracks begin to show. And in time, those cracks came so sharp, so undeniable that I could no longer ignore them. And that's when everything I had built, everything I thought I knew about my son began to unravel. For a long time, I managed to convince myself that everything was fine, that the questions in my head were just the insecurities of a young mother, the overthinking of someone who loved too much. But doubts are like cracks in a wall. You can paint over them, hide them behind pictures, pretend they're not there. Yet over time, they spread, widening little by little until they're impossible to ignore. That was what started to happen to me. The first real crack appeared when my son was 6 years old. It was supposed to be a simple doctor's appointment, just a routine checkup. I remember sitting with him in that small, brightly lit exam room, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air as he swung his legs nervously from the table. He was always so brave, even when he was scared, and I told him it would be quick and easy. When the nurse pricked his finger and drew a vial of blood, he hardly flinched. I held his hand and smiled, whispering how proud I was of him. The doctor came back later with the results, and I'll never forget the way he hesitated. He looked at the paper longer than normal, as if double checking something. Finally, he smiled politely and said, "Everything looks fine. Hez healthy." But then he added almost casually, "His blood type is a little unusual." I frowned, confused, and asked what he meant. He explained, matter of fact, that based on my blood type and my husband's, my son's results didn't quite match. "It happens sometimes," he said, waving it off. "Could be a rare genetic exception, or even a lab error. Nothing to worry about." I nodded and forced a smile, but inside, I felt something shift. His words echoed in my mind, "Didn't quite match. Rare. Error." He meant to reassure me, but instead he had opened a door I had been keeping locked for years. That night, after I tucked my son into bed and kissed his forehead, I sat at the kitchen table with that lab slip in my hands. My fingers traced the numbers, my eyes reading them again and again until the paper blurred. The house was silent, but my thoughts screamed. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself the doctor was right. But the truth had slipped through the cracks, and now I couldn't unsee it. The questions followed me everywhere. When I filled out forms for his school, listing family medical history, I hesitated. I realized how often I was guessing, how often I was stretching the truth. Did asthma run in our family? No. Then why had he struggled with breathing when he was younger? Did skin allergies run on my side? Not really. Then why did his arms break out in rashes every spring? It was small things, but they piled up until I felt like I was describing a stranger. Even in daily life, reminders came uninvited. Teachers at school commented on how different he looked from me when I dropped him off. Strangers in grocery stores tilted their heads and asked, "Who does he look like more, you or his father?" I would laugh and brush it off, saying, "Oh, he has his own look." But every comment was like a needle, sharp and relentless. The hardest moments were the ones with him directly. One evening, he asked me a simple question while drawing at the kitchen table. "Mom, where did I get my eyes?" He looked up at me with those eyes so striking, so unlike mine or his father's. I froze, searching for words. I forced a smile and told him he was special, one of a kind. He grinned proudly and went back to his drawing, but my heart twisted, because deep down I knew that answer wasn't enough. Nights became the hardest. When the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, I found myself standing in his doorway, staring at him as he slept. His little chest rose and fell with steady breaths, his hair curled against his forehead, and I wanted so badly to see myself in him. I wanted to find my nose, my smile, my father's jawline, something, anything. But the more I looked, the more I saw someone else, someone I didn't know. And that was when the ache inside me deepened into fear. I tried to bury it with love. I told myself love was all that mattered. After all, love had carried us this far. Love had gotten me through the sleepless nights, the illnesses, the scraped knees, the broken toys, the endless questions. Love made me his mother, but I couldn't escape the truth pressing against me, demanding to be heard. Because love can cover doubts, but it can't erase them. And now my doubts were louder than ever. Something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was or how to face it, but I knew deep down that my son's story was as simple as I wanted it to be. And when I finally went searching for answers, the secrets I uncovered in the hospital records would shake the ground beneath me. By the time my son was 9 years old, the questions that had lived quietly in the corners of my mind were no longer whispers. They were loud, persistent, impossible to ignore. I had tried for years to push them away, convincing myself that love was enough, that blood didn't matter. But it wasn't just about love anymore. It was about truth. Something deep inside me knew there was more to the story, and I couldn't keep running from it. The decision to return to the hospital came one morning without warning. I remember standing in the kitchen, packing my son's lunch for school, when I glanced at him sitting at the table. He was bent over a book, his brow furrowed in concentration, his eyes, the eyes that never matched mine, scanning the pages. And in that moment, I felt it again. That ache, that gap, that question that had haunted me since the day of his birth. I kissed him goodbye, watched him walk through the school gates, and instead of driving to work, I turned the car toward the hospital. Walking through those glass doors felt like walking back into a nightmare. The smell of antiseptic hit me first, sharp, sterile, unforgiving. The sound of distant intercom announcements echoed through the halls, just as they had years ago. My chest tightened as memories came flooding back. The harsh lights above me in the delivery room, the beeping machines, the nurse's face leaning over me with that unreadable expression. I had buried those images for so long, but now they returned with crushing clarity. At the records office, I tried to steady my voice. I'd like to request my son's birth records, I said, sliding the form across the counter. The woman behind the desk was polite, efficient, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. She nodded, disappeared into the back room, and left me sitting there in the sterile silence, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure others could hear it. Minutes passed like hours. Every second made me wonder if I was making a mistake, if digging up the past would only destroy the fragile piece I had left. Finally, the clerk returned and handed me a thin folder. My hands trembled as I opened it. At first glance, it looked ordinary, just sheets of paper clipped together, neat, clinical. But the more I studied the pages, the more wrong it felt. Sections were incomplete. Whole signatures were missing. The discharge papers, the ones I remembered signing through my exhaustion, were blank in places where my name should have been. I turned page after page, my confusion growing into dread. And then I saw it. A name scrawled in rushed handwriting, tucked in the margins where it shouldn't have been. A nurse's name. One I didn't recognize. I froze, staring at it, my mind spinning. She hadn't been one of the kind, smiling nurses who comforted me during labor. No, this was someone else. The same woman I remembered only in flashes, her sharp expression, her darting eyes, her hands moving too quickly as she placed a baby in my arms. Seeing her name on that paper made my blood run cold. I flipped back and forth through the file, hoping I was mistaken. But the more I looked, the stranger it became. Some pages were blurry, as if photocopied in a hurry. Others had sections blacked out with thick ink, entire lines rendered unreadable. What kind of hospital records looked like this? Why did it feel like someone had deliberately hidden the truth? Desperate, I asked the clerk if anyone from that time still worked at the hospital. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before answering. Most of them have retired or moved on, she said, but I think one of the ward clerks from back then still lives nearby. She scribbled a name and number on a slip of paper, slid it across the counter, and lowered her voice. You didn't get this from me? I left the hospital gripping that folder like it was a live wire, my chest tight with panic. In the car, I sat in silence, staring at the nurse's name again and again until the letters blurred. My mind raced. Was this the explanation for all the doubts, all the cracks in the illusion I had been living? I needed answers, and I needed them now. That evening, after pacing my kitchen for what felt like hours, I picked up the phone and dialed the number the clerk had given me. An elderly woman answered, her voice soft, cautious. I introduced myself, explained that my son had been born in her ward years ago, and that I had questions about a nurse listed in my records. At first, she was quiet, too quiet. I thought she might hang up, but then she sighed and said something that made my stomach drop. We had problems with her, she said. Her voice carried the weight of memory, of something unspoken for far too long. You're not the first mother to ask questions. My heart stopped. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I begged her to tell me more, to explain what she meant, but she refused to go into detail. All I can say, she whispered, is that things happened back then that shouldn't have. If you're seeing her name on your papers, you have every reason to be asking. And then she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the silent phone in my hand, my entire body trembling. Her words repeated in my mind like a drumbeat. You're not the first, mother, not the first. What did that mean? How many others had been affected? And what exactly had that nurse done? For the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been too afraid to form. What if the child I had been raising, loving, and protecting with every ounce of my soul wasn't actually mine? And then, just when I thought I couldn't carry any more doubt, the truth arrived at my door, in the form of a boy who claimed to be my real son. I thought the hospital records would be the hardest thing I would ever face. I thought the missing signatures, the strange nurse's name, and the warning from the retired clerk would be enough to tear me apart. But I was wrong. The real breaking point didn't come from paper or whispers in the past, it came from flesh and blood. It came from the day my real son appeared in my life. It started so quietly, so unexpectedly, that at first I didn't even realize what was happening. It was an ordinary afternoon. I had just come home from work, my bag heavy on my shoulder, when I noticed an envelope mixed in with the rest of the mail. No return address, plain white. I almost threw it away, thinking it was junk, but something about it made me pause. The paper felt heavier than usual, like it carried weight beyond its size. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the contents. Inside was a single letter and a photograph. The letter was written in neat, careful handwriting, the kind of script that looks like the writer erased and rewrote it many times before sending. At the top was a name, Daniel. My eyes caught on the first line, and my breath stopped. Mrs. I don't know how to tell you this, but I believe I am your son. My heart nearly stopped beating. I read it once, then again, my hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Daniel explained that he had recently taken a DNA test through one of those ancestry websites, a test he had only done out of curiosity. He wanted to know more about where he came from, but instead of finding distant relatives in another country, the test had revealed something shocking. The parents who raised him were not his biological family, and when he looked deeper, when the results connected him to me, the truth began to unravel. He wrote about the confusion, the anger, the heartbreak of realizing that the life he thought he knew was a lie. He wrote about the arguments with the family who had raised him, the painful conversations, the disbelief. But above all, he wrote about hope, the hope that finding me would finally give him the answers he needed. And then I turned the letter over and found the photograph. The moment my eyes fell on it, the world around me disappeared. The air left my lungs, and I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the picture as though it might vanish if I let it go. The boy in the photo was about 15 or 16, tall and lean, with a posture that carried both awkwardness and quiet strength. But what struck me, what made my knees go weak and my chest ache, were his eyes. They were my father's eyes, my grandmother's cheekbones, my family written into every line of his face. For years, I had stared at the son I was raising and searched desperately for traces of myself, only to come up empty. And now, here in this photograph, all those missing pieces came rushing back at once. I didn't need a DNA test. I didn't need an explanation. My heart knew instantly this boy was mine. The letter ended with a plea. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to understand. I think you are my real mother. Please, can we meet? I pressed the photo to my chest and sobbed. All the years of doubt, all the questions, all the pain, it all came flooding out in an avalanche of grief and clarity. Somewhere out there, my real son had been living a life without me. Another family had celebrated his birthdays, taught him to ride a bike, watched him grow into the young man in that photo. All the milestones I should have been there for had been stolen from me. But what cut even deeper was the realization that my life was tied to two boys now. The one I had raised, who knew me as Mom, who had my love even if he didn't have my blood, and the one in the photograph who carried my blood but not my memories. I was split in two, torn down the middle, and I didn't know how to put myself back together. For nights I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake with the letter on my nightstand, the photograph burning in my mind. I would get up, walk to my son's room, and watch him sleep, his face so peaceful, so unaware of the storm that was about to crash over us. How could I tell him? How could I explain that another boy out there was my biological child? Would he feel betrayed? Would he feel replaced? Would he still see me as his mother? And then I thought of Daniel, the boy in the photo. What had his childhood been like? Did he feel loved? Did he feel different, like he didn't quite belong? Did he ever stare at his reflection and wonder why he didn't look like the parents raising him? The questions clawed at me, leaving me raw. Eventually, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I wrote back. I agreed to meet him. We chose a small cafe in town, a place quiet enough to talk, but public enough to feel safe. I arrived early. My nerves wound so tight I thought I might unravel. Every time the door opened, I looked up, my breath catching, only to sink back into my seat when it wasn't him. And then he walked in. The moment I saw him, time froze. He scanned the room nervously, his eyes darting until they found mine. And when our eyes met, something inside me shifted. It was as though a piece of me that had been missing for years had suddenly returned. I didn't need proof. I didn't need words. I knew he was mine. He approached slowly, cautiously, as though afraid I might turn him away. He sat across from me, his hands fidgeting in his lap, his shoulders tense. His voice trembled as he finally spoke. "I think you're my mom." Tears streamed down my face before I could even answer. I reached across the table, took his trembling hands in mine, and whispered, "You are. You always were." In that moment, the calf disappeared. The clinking of cups, the chatter of strangers, the hum of life around us, all of it faded. There was only him, my son, my child, the boy I should have held 15 years ago, the boy I should have rocked to sleep, kissed goodnight, cheered for on his first day of school. 15 years of stolen moments crushed me, but here he was, flesh and blood, real and alive. I wanted to hug him, to hold him the way I had longed to without knowing it. But he was hesitant, guarded, carrying the weight of confusion and betrayal from his own life. And so I held back, giving him space. But every part of me screamed to close the gap between us. The joy of finding him was overwhelming, but so was the pain. Because love doesn't erase loss. Meeting him didn't give me back the years we had lost, the memories we had been robbed of. It only reminded me of everything that had been taken. But at the same time, I felt hope. Because even though the years were gone, even though the truth had been buried in lies, I had him now, and that was more than I ever thought possible. But one truth always leads to another, and this revelation didn't just change my life. It shook the world of the boy I had raised, leaving me to face an impossible question: what happens when both sons demand the same mother? When I first reached across that calf table and held Daniel's hands, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I thought that finding him was the mountain I had been climbing without even realizing it, and that the rest of the journey would be downhill. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Meeting him wasn't the end of my struggle, it was the beginning of an entirely new one. Because when one truth comes to light, it doesn't just stand alone. It drags all the lies and secrets with it, and everyone around you has to face the fallout. The first person I told was my husband. I waited until the house was quiet, until the boy I had raised was asleep in his room. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat across from the man I had shared my life with for over a decade. I slid Daniel's letter and photo across the kitchen table, my hands trembling so hard the papers rattled against the wood. He frowned at first, confused, but as his eyes moved over the words, his expression shifted. By the time he picked up the photo, the blood had drained from his face. "He looks just like you," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "Because he is mine. He's my son. My real son." The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't the calm silence of two people who understood each other. It was heavy, suffocating, full of questions neither of us knew how to ask. When he finally spoke, his voice was sharp, controlled, but underneath it, I could hear the fear. What does this mean for us? For our family? I wanted to reassure him, but I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know what it meant. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. And then came the hardest part, telling the boy I had raised, the child who had called me mom every single day of his life. I sat him down in the living room, my hands shaking as I explained everything as gently as I could. At first, he just stared at me, his face blank, his eyes wide with confusion. But when I said the words that another boy had come forward, that the DNA test proved he was my biological son, his expression crumbled. Hurt flooded his face, followed by fear, followed by something I had never seen in him before: doubt. So am I not your son? His voice was so soft, so fragile, that it broke me in half. I lunged forward, grabbing his hands, holding them tight. You are my son, I said fiercely, desperately. You will always be my son. Nothing will ever change that. But he pulled his hands away, shaking his head. No, not now. Not if he's your real son. You don't mean it. Those words pierced deeper than any knife could. Because he was right, Daniel was my real son, my blood. But what he couldn't understand, what I couldn't put into words, was that he was real too. My love for him was no less true just because our blood didn't match. He was mine in every way that mattered, in the scraped knees I had bandaged, the bedtime stories I had told, the tears I had wiped away, the nights I had stayed up just to watch him breathe. The days that followed were chaos. My husband became distant, quiet, always lost in his thoughts. The boy I had raised stopped talking to me, retreating into his room, his headphones a shield I couldn't penetrate. And Daniel, sweet, hopeful Daniel, was calling me, texting me, asking when we could see each other again. Every decision I made seemed to hurt one of them. Every choice felt like betrayal. One night, the boy I had raised finally broke. He came into the living room, his face red, his eyes shining with tears he refused to let fall. His voice shook as he shouted, "Why wasn't I enough? Why do you need him?" I felt my knees weaken. "You are enough," I cried. "You have always been enough. But I can't pretend he doesn't exist. He's my blood. He's my son, too." He turned away, his voice bitter and broken. "So what am I then? A mistake? Somebody else's kid you got stuck with?" I rushed to him, grabbed his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. His tears finally spilled, and mine joined them. "You are my child," I whispered through the sobs. "You are my heart. I chose you every single day. I loved you every single day, and I will never stop. Blood doesn't change that. Nothing can change that." He collapsed against me, sobbing into my chest like he had when he was a little boy, afraid of monsters under the bed. I held him, rocking him gently, whispering over and over that he was mine, that he always would be. But in my heart, I knew that words alone wouldn't heal this wound. It would take time. It would take patience. And it would take a love so strong that it could hold two boys who now felt like rivals for the same mother. And still, even as I tried to hold my broken family together, another question gnawed at me. The question that had started all of this. Why? Why had this happened? Why had my baby been taken from me and replaced with another, who had decided to rewrite my entire life, to protect both of my sons and rebuild what had been shattered? I had to dig into the past and uncover the dark motive behind why my baby was switched at birth. The question of why consumed me. It was the question that lingered in the air when I tried to sleep at night, the question that echoed in my chest every time I looked at either of my sons. I could almost live with the pain of what had been stolen from me almost, but I could not live with not knowing why. Why had this happened? Why had someone looked at me, a brand new mother in that hospital room, and decided I did not deserve the child I carried for 9 months? I began with the hospital because where else could I go? The building had always felt sterile and cold to me, but now it felt almost sinister, as if the walls themselves were keeping secrets. I carried with me the thin, incomplete folder of records I had been given, its missing signatures and strange gaps practically screaming that something was wrong. I stood at the counter in the records office, my voice firm even as my hands trembled. "I want to know about this nurse, Evelyn Hart. Why was she there the night my son was born? Why are my records incomplete?" The clerk's polite smile faltered. She glanced at the name on the page. then at me, then back. Again. Her lips pressed into a tight line. I'm sorry, Mom, but we don't keep employment histories here. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. Please, I just need to understand. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but then her eyes flicked toward a supervisor across the room, and she shook her head. That nurse doesn't work here anymore. She left years ago. That should have been the end of it. But the way she said it, the stiffness in her tone, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine, told me there was more. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and vowed I would not stop until I knew everything. So I dug. I called former staff whose names I found in old newsletters. I searched newspaper archives for any mention of Evelyn Hart. I asked around town quietly, carefully. For weeks, I felt like a detective unraveling a crime no one wanted solved. Most people told me they remembered little or nothing. But every so often, someone's voice would shift, just slightly, when I said her name. Finally, I struck something. A retired midwife agreed to meet with me. She lived in a modest house just outside town, and when I knocked on her door, she looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and pity. We sat at her kitchen table, the air smelling faintly of tea and old wood, and I showed her the file, pointing to the nurse's name. Please, I begged, tell me about her. Tell me why her name is on my paperwork. The midwife's face tightened immediately. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her napkin. Evelyn Hart, she muttered, as if the name itself carried a weight she didn't want to hold. Finally, she met my eyes, and what I saw there made my stomach drop anger, but also fear. She should never have been allowed back after what happened, she said bitterly. My throat went dry. Back? What do you mean? The midwife sighed, her voice heavy with old memories. She lost her own child, stillbirth, a little girl. She came back to work far too soon. She was different after that, colder, distant. Some said she seemed hollow, like she was just going through the motions, but other times the woman trailed off, shaking her head. Other times what? I pressed, my voice sharp with desperation. She looked at the mothers differently, especially the young ones, with envy, with resentment, as though she thought some women hadn't earned what she had lost. There were complaints, small things at first, papers misplaced, mothers confused about. Their discharge notes, things not lining up, but nothing anyone could ever prove. And hospitals don't like scandals. They brushed it all under the rug. Her words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Are you saying she switched babies? On purpose? The midwife didn't answer right away. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes far away, like she was reliving something. Finally, she whispered, I don't know what she did in your case. I can't say for sure, but I wouldn't put it past her. We all knew something was off. We all knew she was carrying something dark inside her. I sat frozen in that kitchen, my hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Rage and grief warred inside me. My entire life, my son's entire lives, had been rewritten because of a woman's grief and bitterness. Because Evelyn Hart had lost her child, she had decided to steal mine. She had looked at me in that hospital room, a vulnerable young mother, and taken everything from me without a second thought. On the drive home, I could barely see through my tears. I pulled the car over on the side of the road, buried my face in my hands, and screamed until my throat was raw. I screamed for the years I had lost with my real son. I screamed for the pain I had caused the boy I had raised, who now questioned his place in my life. I screamed for the cruelty of it all, that one woman's brokenness had shattered so many lives. But the screaming did nothing. I knew what I had to do. I had to face her. I had to look Evelyn Hart in the eyes and demand answers, demand to know what she had done to me, to my children. I found out she was still alive, living in a small town 2 hours away, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where no one knew the devastation she had caused. The thought of confronting her made my stomach knot, but I knew I couldn't move forward until I did. I had to hear the truth from her own lips. But when I finally stood before the woman who had stolen my baby, I realized that the greatest battle wasn't with her. It was with the broken family I had to rebuild from the ashes she left behind. When I learned Evelyn Hart's motive, I thought confronting her would give me closure. I thought looking her in the eye and hearing her admit what she had done would somehow make the weight easier to carry. But I was wrong. Even if she confessed, even if she begged for forgiveness, the damage was already done. The real battle wasn't with her, it was here, in my home, between two boys who both called me mom, in their own ways, and who both deserved me. Bringing Daniel into our lives was like learning how to breathe a second time. The first time he came to the house, I stood at the door with my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear him knock. When I opened it, there he was, awkward, nervous, clutching the strap of his backpack like it was a lifeline. Behind him, I saw his adoptive parents in the car, watching anxiously, torn between fear and hope. The boy I had raised stood at my side, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. He didn't say a word. He just stared, his eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and hostility. To him, Daniel was an intruder, a threat, and to Daniel, my son was the boy who had lived the life he should have had. I tried to bridge the gap. I brought them both into the living room, offered snacks, tried to make small talk, but every word felt heavy. Daniel was polite, careful, as though he didn't want to step on anyone's toes. The boy I had raised stayed silent, his eyes darting between us, his anger radiating even in his stillness. I sat between them, feeling like I was being torn in two directions, desperate to reassure them both. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Daniel wanted time with me, wanted to know me, to fill the gap of 15 stolen years. He asked questions about my childhood, my parents, the family traits he saw in himself. Every answer I gave him felt like a gift, like I was giving him back something that had been denied him for too long. But every time I laughed with Daniel, every time I looked at him with pride, I could feel the other boy watching and wondering if he was being replaced. And he started to ask questions of his own. Do you love him more because he's your real son? Would you have chosen him instead of me if you'd known the truth from the beginning? Each question broke me because no answer I gave seemed to heal the wound. I told him over and over that my love for him hadn't changed, that it never would, but the shadow of doubt was always there. One night, the tension finally erupted. We were at the dinner table, the four of us, my husband Daniel, the boy I had raised, and me. I tried to create a sense of normalcy, passing plates, asking about school, pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't. The boy I had raised suddenly slammed his fork down and glared across the table. Why are you even here? He snapped at Daniel. The room froze. Daniel's face fell, his eyes widening with hurt. Because I wanted to meet my mom, he said quietly. She's not your mom, my son shouted, his voice cracking. She's mine. You don't get to just show up and take her from me. I reached for him, my voice shaking. Stop, please. You're both my sons. I love you both. But the words only seemed to make it worse. You can't love us both, he yelled, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood. You have to choose. That sentence shattered me. The idea of choosing between them was unbearable. They were both my sons, one by blood, one by bond, and I refused to let the cruelty of what had been done to us force me into that impossible choice. Tears streamed down my face as I stood and pulled him into my arms despite his resistance. No, I whispered fiercely, I will not choose. You are mine, and he is mine too. You are both my children, and nothing will ever change that. He sobbed into my chest, his anger melting into grief. Across the table, Daniel's eyes filled with tears as well. For the first time, I saw not just the pain of what he had lost, but also the fear that he might never truly belong. In that moment, I realized that my fight wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about building a future where both boys knew they were loved, wanted, and irreplaceable. But that future wouldn't come easily. Because while my love for them was infinite, the wounds of the past were deep, and healing them would require confronting not just Evelyn Hart, but the systems that allowed her to steal so much from us. And so, with both my sons' fragile hearts in my hands, I prepared to face the woman who had caused it, all ready to demand the truth from her lips, no matter how painful it would be. The drive to Evelyn Hartstown was one of the longest of my life. The road stretched out endlessly, mile after mile of gray asphalt, but all I could see in my mind was her face. I had only glimpsed it for seconds all those years ago, the sharp tilt of her chin, the way her eyes had darted around the hospital room, the hands that moved too quickly as she placed a baby in my arms. For years, I had told myself it was just exhaustion, that I had imagined it. But now I knew the truth. That fleeting image had been the face of the woman who stole my life as a mother and rewrote it without my permission. By the time I pulled into her neighborhood, my chest felt tight, as though I had been holding my breath the entire drive. Her house looked ordinary, almost pitiful small, with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and curtains drawn tightly as if hiding from the world. If I had passed it any other day, I wouldn't have given it a second glance. But to me, it was the epicenter of the earthquake that had shattered my family. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat to the fragile safety of not knowing more. But another part, the mother who had clawed her way through years of lies to get here, knew I couldn't stop now. I had to look her in the eye. I had to hear her say it. When I finally climbed the steps and knocked on her door, the sound echoed through the quiet street like a thunderclap. The door creaked open, and there she was. Evelyn Hart. Time had aged her. Her once dark hair was streaked with gray, her skin lined with years, her posture stooped, but her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, I recognized them instantly. For a moment, they widened in shock and then narrowed in suspicion. "You don't know me," I said, though my voice trembled, "but I know you. You were there the night my son was born, and you switched him." For a long moment, she didn't answer. She simply stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line, as if weighing whether to slam the door in my face. Finally, with a weary sigh, she stepped aside. "Come in," she muttered. Inside, her house smelled faintly of dust and stale air. The furniture was sparse, almost barren, the walls bare except for a single faded picture of a baby in a frame on the mantel. My stomach twisted when I saw it. She lowered herself into a worn armchair, her movements heavy, and gestured for me to sit. But I remained standing, my pulse hammering in my ears. She broke the silence first. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly. Her words hit me like a blade. My knees nearly buckled. "So it's true," I whispered. "You did it. You stole my son." Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was no denial, no excuses. She nodded. Yes. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I had ever felt. My whole body shook with it. My voice came out raw, trembling with fury. "Why? Tell me why you did it. Tell me why you thought you had the right to rip apart my life." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together, and for the first time I saw not malice, but emptiness. "Because you had what I lost," she whispered. "I carried a child once, too. A little girl, stillborn." I held her for just a moment before they took her away. After that, there was nothing. No baby, no future, just silence. Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced myself to listen. "I came back to work too soon," she continued. "Everyone said so, but what else was I supposed to do? I thought I could bury the grief under routine, but it followed me. Every cry, every mother cradling her newborn, it tore me open again and again. And I started to look at those mothers differently. The young ones, the ones who seemed ungrateful, careless. I thought they didn't deserve what they had." Her voice cracked, but I felt no sympathy. My hands curled into fists at my sides. "And one night," she went on, her voice barely audible, "I snapped. I looked at you, weak and exhausted, barely conscious, and I thought I could change things. I could give another woman what she didn't have. I told myself the baby would be loved just the same, no matter whose arms he landed in. I told myself it wouldn't matter." My tears spilled over, my whole body trembling with rage. "Wouldn't matter?" My voice rose, sharp and fierce. "You stole my son. You rewrote his life. You tore mine in half. And you call that something that wouldn't matter?" She lowered her gaze, shame flickering across her face. "I've lived with it every day since. The guilt, the weight. I knew it would catch me one day, but nothing I say will undo what I did." "You're right about that," I said, my voice breaking. "You can't undo it. You can't give me back the birthdays I missed, the first words I didn't hear, the life I should have shared with my child. You can't erase the pain you've caused both of my sons. You destroyed us. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. You don't deserve forgiveness. Not from me, not from them. I didn't come here for that. I came here to tell you that your choices don't own me anymore. You may have stolen my child, but you will never steal my strength again. My family will not be defined by what you did. She sat there silently, her lips trembling, her eyes glassy. Maybe she wanted to beg, maybe she wanted to explain further, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned, walked out the door, and slammed it behind me. The cool air outside hit my face, and I inhaled sharply, my chest heaving. For the first time, I felt like I had faced the ghost that had haunted me for so long. But as I walked back to my car, one truth hit me harder than ever. Facing her didn't fix the fractures at home. It didn't mend the rift between the boy I had raised and the boy I had found. That battle was still waiting for me. And when I returned home, I realized the real storm wasn't over. The real storm was brewing between my two sons, two boys, bound by fate, divided by pain, both demanding the same mother. When I left Evelyn Hart's house, I thought I had done the hardest thing a mother could ever do. I had stood in front of the woman who stole my child, looked her in the eyes, and refused to let her define me. I thought the storm had broken and the worst of it was behind me. But when I walked back into my own home, I realized that Evelyn Hart wasn't my biggest battle anymore. The real storm was waiting here, under my own roof, between my two sons. Daniel had hope in his eyes every time he came to see me. He wanted desperately to belong, to make up for 15 years of silence and distance. He asked me about my childhood, about my parents, about the things he saw in himself when he looked in the mirror. Every time I answered, every time I gave him a piece of myself, I could see him clinging to it like treasure. He had been robbed of me for so long that even the smallest detail, a story about my grandmother's garden, a family recipe, a phrase my father used to say, felt like proof that he was finally home. But for the boy I had raised, every one of those moments was a wound. He had grown up with me as his whole world, his anchor, his safety. And now suddenly another boy was here, calling me mom, pulling pieces of me away, and claiming rights that had always belonged to him alone. He didn't say it outright, but I could see it in his eyes, fear. Fear that I would leave him, fear that I would replace him, fear that blood would mean more than the years we had shared. The tension between them grew heavier with every passing day. At the dinner table, Daniel tried to make conversation, asking about school or about my son's favorite hobbies. But my son would answer with one-word replies, his voice flat, his eyes burning with resentment. When Daniel came over, I could hear my son's door slam upstairs. The music turned up loud to drown out the sound of us talking in the kitchen. Even when they were in the same room, it felt like there was an invisible wall between them, one made of jealousy, grief, and unspoken pain. I tried to bridge the gap. I organized family outings, small dinners, even board games, anything to make them laugh together, anything to remind them that they weren't enemies. But every attempt fell flat. My husband watched quietly, his own pain simmering beneath the surface. But even he didn't know how to fix what had been broken. And me? I felt like I was being torn in two, like every breath I took was split between two boys who both needed me completely. The breaking point came one evening when I thought foolishly that watching a movie together might ease the tension. I made popcorn, dimmed the lights, and sat between them on the couch, praying that normalcy could smooth the jagged edges between them. For the first half hour, there was silence, tense but bearable. And then suddenly my son stood, his fists clenched, his face red with anger. "Why do you have to be here?" he shouted at Daniel, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. Daniel froze, stunned by the outburst. His voice came out soft, almost apologetic. "Because she's my mom too." That sentence was like gasoline on fire. My son's face twisted with rage. "She's not your mom. She's mine. You don't get to just show up after 15 years and take her from me." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but his voice rose too, his pain spilling over. "I didn't ask for this. Do you think I wanted to find out my whole life was a lie? Do you think I asked to be stolen from her? I didn't ask for any of it. All I wanted was to know my mom." The words hung in the air like a blade. My heart pounded as I looked between them, both of them standing now facing each other like enemies when they were both victims of the same cruel crime. And then my son turned to me, his eyes wild with desperation. Mom, you have to choose. You can't have both. You have to choose. Time stopped. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, my lungs refusing to draw air. This was the moment I had dreaded from the very beginning, the nightmare I had played in my head again and again, the impossible choice. One son made of my blood, the other made of my bond. Two boys, each demanding to know who mattered more. But as I looked at them, my heart breaking, I knew the truth. I couldn't choose. I wouldn't choose. Tears streamed down my face as I stepped between them, my arms outstretched as though I could hold back their pain with sheer will. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I will not choose. You are both my sons. One of you was born from my body, and one of you was born from my heart. You are both mine, and I will not let what was stolen from us turn us into enemies. My son shook his head, his voice trembling. But you love him more now. I can see it. I grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at me. No, listen to me. I don't love him more. I don't love you less. My love doesn't work like that. Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. I have enough love for both of you, and nothing will ever take that away. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his tears finally spilling. But where do I fit? He whispered. I've missed everything. I've lost everything. Do I even belong here? I turned to him, cupping his face in my hands. You belong because you are mine. You were always mine. Even when you weren't here, even when you were lost to me, you were in my heart. And now that I've found you, I will never let you go again. For a long, aching moment, the room was silent except for our sobs. Then, slowly, my son collapsed into my arms, his anger breaking into grief. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward too, his body trembling as he pressed into me. And there I was, holding both of them, one on each side, their tears soaking into my shirt, my arms barely strong enough to contain the weight of all that pain and love. It wasn't neat. It wasn't perfect. The wounds didn't vanish, and the scars didn't fade. But for the first time, I felt something shift. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, love could hold us together. The woman who switched my baby at birth had thought she could break me. She thought she could rob me of my child, of my worth, of my family. But she underestimated me. She underestimated the strength of a mother's love. Because in the end, I didn't lose my son. I found him. And though it nearly destroyed us, though it tore our lives apart, love stitched us back together. I am their mother, both of them. And no one, not Evelyn Hart, not the lies, not the years we lost will ever take that away from us again.